I think I saw Savian just join. I just want to make sure, quadruple check I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Savian Castro?
He's probably muted.
He just texted me yes. I was pretty sure. I just always like to triple check. So we are at 6:30. So I'm going to get us started in just a moment here, making sure I have everybody admitted. So just one confirmation before I begin. Michael, as the timer, I do want to make sure that you can use the chat feature to chat to everyone. Yep, looks good. So we are at 6:31. I do want to get started. I would like to, first of all, thank everybody for attending this forum. It is a shared effort between the Eastside Progressives of Madison, Wisconsin, and GRUMPS, that's the Grandparents United for Madison Public Schools. My name is Jacob Wright. I use he, his pronouns. I'm the chair of the Eastside Progressives. I will be moderating the first half of this forum. You can learn more and get involved with the Eastside Progressives at eastsideprogressives.org or our friends, the GRUMPS, at madcitygrumps.org. All Wisconsin voters are going to be voting in the state superintendent of education election on or before April 6th. We thank both candidates, Deb Kerr and Jill Underly, for joining us tonight for this forum. We will also have a special appearance from Savian Castro and Maya Pearson. They are the two candidates for the two Madison City School Board seats that are on the ballot this April. Neither seat is contested. Savian is an incumbent on his seat, and Maya will be joining him on the board after the April election. Just getting down to business, we have a series of questions for the two state superintendent candidates. Each have answering periods of between 2 and 4 minutes mostly. I'll state the allotted time for each question when I ask it. Michael will be keeping time with warnings in the chat at 10 and 30 seconds. So candidates, I would ask that you just make sure you keep the chat open so that he can do that. I'll also be using the mute feature as required, just to make sure that we stay fair and timely in terms of getting through all of our topics. I'm going to alternate which candidate answers first and second. I did a random drawing earlier today with the help of my 7-year-old. So we'll start with Dr. Deborah Kerr giving her opening statement. That's more than enough from me. So at this point, I will invite you, Deb, to go ahead and make a 2-minute opening statement.
Okay, very good. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you, Jacob, and thank you to the ESP and the GRUMPS. That's a great way to be civically involved in your school system and your community. So thank you. It's an honor to be here. Well, I'm Deborah Kerr. I've got over 40 years of experience dedicated to education. I'm parochial educated and public school dedicated. I'm uniquely qualified to serve as a state superintendent in these unprecedented times. My passion and experience for serving children in all sectors for the past 40 years have prepared me well. I have walked many miles in teachers' and leaders' shoes and served as the public school superintendent in Wisconsin for the last 20 years. I'm an award-winning teacher, principal, high school athletic director, back-to-back state championship girls basketball coach, and a proud superintendent. I started out my superintendent experience at a very small rural school, Wilmot Grade School, 4K through 8th grade, where there was one teacher per section in Western Kenosha County. I also assisted with a consolidation, Trevor-Wilmot Consolidated School District, because Wilmot was never going to be able to sustain itself long-term. And then it was north up to Milwaukee, a first-tier suburb, Brown Deer School District. So as the superintendent in Brown Deer for the past 13 years, I've served over 1,600 students, 80% students of color, 50% economically disadvantaged, speaking 23 different languages. And we successfully closed the achievement gap while also raising the graduation rates for all of our Black and brown and white students. These student-centered strategies we put into action achieve transformational results, and these are scalable across our great state. I've also had elected presidential leadership experiences at the local, state, and national levels. I was a Rotary president for Milwaukee North Shore, superintendent president for our state superintendent's organization, and some other elected leadership. So in closing, now more than ever, we need to stand together on behalf of all children and who serves them every day. And so I look forward to doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Dr. Jill Underly for her opening statement.
All right.
2 minutes.
All right, well, thank you. And thank you everybody again for being here. I'm Jill Underly. I use she, hers pronouns. I'm currently the school superintendent for the Pecatonica Area School District in Southwest Wisconsin. We do have a corner of Dane County. We have Perry, the town of Perry, which is south of Mount Horeb. In my school district, it's a rather large place. And I'm running for state superintendent because I believe that every child every day should have access to a great public education, a solid foundation for which kids can live the rest of their lives. As a former teacher, principal, and now as a local superintendent, I have a proven record of high student achievement, innovation, and sound financial management of my school district. I've been a leader in the state by offering full-day high-quality preschool and child care to all families because high-quality preschool helps kids perform better in school and helps families who struggle with child care costs. As a superintendent, I'll look to expand this to all kids. And throughout the last year, I've safely led my district through this very challenging time, especially with the pandemic, as we're all aware. I'm the only candidate who has done that. I've worked hard to safely reopen the schools in my district for in-person learning because I know how critical it is to our kids' education as well as our workforce and the economy. We worked together last summer with teachers, school board members, community members, administrators, and parents to come up with our reopening plan, and we've been able to stick with that. And that's why safely transitioning schools to face-to-face learning will be a priority for me. So I'm running for a lot of reasons. Equity is at the heart of my agenda. Early childhood education, birth to 3 programs, after school programming, teacher recruitment and retention, especially in the wake of Act 10, and then also mental health and redoing our school finance system so it's equitable for all kids in Wisconsin.
Thank you very much. So we'll move on then to our first question. This is a 3-minute response period. And we will start with Dr. Jill Underly. What are your legislative priorities for Wisconsin's educational system, and how do you plan to work with the Republican-controlled state legislature to try and advance those priorities?
Thank you for that question. So my legislative priorities are expanding access to early childhood education, teacher recruitment and retention, and also expanding access to mental health and redoing our school finance system. So how do I plan to do that? I have a good reputation in the state of Wisconsin as somebody who works with the legislature. I've been a proven public school advocate for as long as I've been involved in public service here in Wisconsin. I work closely already with individuals from both sides of the aisle. My school district is represented by 2 Republican legislators as well as 2 Democrats. It's a large area, like I said before. I also have worked with school boards that are split and divided. And we've been able to get incredible innovation across our school district with the early childhood programming here at Pecatonica, as well as things like our Construction Academy, which was aiming to get more students involved in apprenticeships in the trades. So I already have a reputation for working with that. We'll get individuals early childhood is reimbursed at 60%. Pecatonica has been able to I'm getting the internet connection is unstable, and I have to apologize. I am on rural internet. If I come out, I'll come back in. Pecatonic has been able to have full day 4K every day, and it was at not really much additional cost once we cut out the midday bus route. And what we found was that increased student achievement. And so by looking at this program from an equity perspective, making sure all kids have access to this has been important. Also looking at teacher recruitment and retention, getting more individuals into the teaching profession, working with the legislature to look at why we have shortages, looking at the policies that are preventing individuals from going into the teaching profession. Maybe it's pay, maybe it's benefits, maybe it's working conditions, maybe it's all the above, but making sure that they understand what it is and why teachers are so important to the structures of our school and the success of our schools, including more teachers of color into our recruitment and retention, and using the research that's available to ensure that we can do that. Using my advocacy level at the state to get more funding for mental health, additional school counselors, school social workers, school psychologists, resources to the kids that need it the most. That's always been my goal. And certainly with the school finance system, using the recommendations from the Blue Ribbon Commission, I was expert testimony on that commission, for my school district, and using those recommendations and advocating for them because it was a bipartisan commission that did that. So that's it in a nutshell for sure.
Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Dr. Deb Kerr.
Well, my vision is to create a world-class education system that the state of Wisconsin will be most proud of, and it will be a model across the country. We will do this by a commitment to our Wisconsin promise, where every student in our Wisconsin schools will be known by name, strength, passion, and need, ready to graduate into a future they choose. And I agree with Jill on a lot of these challenges that we're facing, whether it's teacher licensing, teachers in the pipeline, getting funding to support our public schools and all the other sectors. But we really need to focus on excellence and equity. And this will be done focusing on continuous improvement processes in reading and math, which includes personalized learning plans for all kids. And I have experience at not only testifying at Joint Finance, I've worked at Capitol Hill to leverage federal funds for our Wisconsin schools as our state president of WASDA and our national president of our Superintendents Association. And so I've already had many laws and legislation that's been passed. The most recent one is in teacher licensing for career and technical education, that I actually got law passed so that I could hire technical education and business teachers around here. But one of the greatest challenges we're all facing is that COVID slide and all the achievement gaps that have been exacerbated by this unrelenting pandemic. So we all know that literacy is the gateway to education into our future. So we need to get Wisconsin off that 10-year list of having the largest achievement gap in the country between Black and white students, according to the nation's report card. And unfortunately, Wisconsin is dead last in early literacy for our Black students and a lot of our other groups of students. So I've had the experience of starting 2 4K kindergarten programs at Wilmot Grade School and at Brown Deer School District so that we could try to stop the achievement gap before it starts, but it starts even before then. So my plan as the next state superintendent begins with a reading roadmap for pre-K through 3rd grade with very ambitious goals to address and start closing the gaps within that first year. And what this includes is evidence-based policies and practices that enable us to seize this moment in history to rethink how our schools can be transformed. So we need to make sure that our teachers are well prepared, whether it's in teacher education programs and using the science of reading to help make sure that we are teaching reading consistently. So right now we have 400 different ways of teaching reading across the state. We've got to stop that. We've got to measure the metrics that matter that will get us higher outcomes. So I will do that by identifying 80% proficiency for all kids. We will identify milestones along the way. So we all want all of our 3rd graders to be able to read by the end of 3rd grade, but we don't have a consistent framework on how to get us there from birth to 3rd grade. So we will set expected growth goals, and this is what excellent looks like. The other piece is partnerships, and we'll talk more about that as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to the next question. This one, Deb Kerr, you will be responding first. The searing gap in minority academic performance in Wisconsin schools is a crisis. What policies can the Department of Public Instruction pursue to reduce this gap, and what legislation would you advocate for the legislature to take up to address the gap?
Okay. Could you just repeat the first part of that sentence? I think I misunderstood.
I absolutely can. The searing gap in minority academic performance in Wisconsin schools is a crisis.
Yes, it is. Well, first of all, I believe our public schools are at a crisis right now because we're not back to face-to-face instruction in all of our public schools across our great state of Wisconsin. And unfortunately, the 5 largest urban districts, Green Bay, Madison, Milwaukee, Racine, and Kenosha's, I think, part-time back to face-to-face. These schools house our children, our Black and brown children. And unfortunately, a lot of their white counterparts are back in school. And so I want all of us to get back into school safely and sensibly, because it's the science of the data shows we can do just that. And so I want to work with the legislation to not only give us incentives to support my reading roadmap, but to help us get back into school as soon as possible, sensibly and safely. Teachers don't need the vaccine necessarily to be able to open our schools, and that's what the doctors are saying, the CDC, the pediatricians association. So we need to get back to school so that we can eliminate these achievement gaps that we've known have existed for a very long time. And so I think what we've learned from this pandemic is that some kids have thrived in this virtual world, and even some teachers have thrived. And so I think we're going to have to continue to give students and parents choices on how they would like to see school happen. But I'm worried we're losing a lot of our public school students because we haven't been able to find them. So enrollment is down across the state 3 to 4% right now. And I know right here in metropolitan Milwaukee, we are missing our 4 and 5-year-olds. We don't know where they are. Are they enrolled in private schools or parochial schools, or they are just not showing up for instruction? And so I will work the legislation to support all the professional development that teachers need to get back into the classroom safely. And that's about mental health, trauma-sensitive care, social emotional learning, because our teachers need that too, just as much as our kids. Because if we don't have those kinds of supports right away in the beginning, we can't expect everyone to do their best job of teaching and our best job of our kids learning. So I will work with the legislature to make sure that we have the funds that we need to be supported as we re-enter and recover from this pandemic. Because I fear, this is what keeps me up at night, is that we're going to be in this recovery for many years. And so our schedules are going to look differently in our schools. I think that I know that many school leaders are planning for a different kind of school calendar this summer, whether it's enrichment or remediation or acceleration. But I think our kids need to stay connected to school, because I think in that in itself, that will be therapeutic enough to get back into school to help them start to recover from this pandemic, because our kids have missed their teachers, our teachers have missed their kids. And I believe that once we get back into school in a regular routine, we might have to keep that going, maybe at a modified schedule, but we might have to keep that going through the summer if parents are willing to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Dr. Jill Underly, 3 minutes.
All right, thanks, Jacob. So you referenced the gaps in education, and the way I look at them and have always looked at them is that they're opportunity gaps. Because when you call them necessarily achievement gaps, you're putting the blame or the onus on the kids and the responsibility on the kids. But really, what we have is that these gaps are results of decades, century-old policies that are racist, that have provided the kids who have the more opportunities in our system with better results. So the reality is in Wisconsin that the fact of where you live determines your opportunities, and the kids with more opportunities will have better achievement. There's a correlation certainly between more resources and better student achievement, for sure. And there's also the old saying that there are no do-overs in education. That's why we have to make sure that every kid, regardless of their zip code, gets a world-class education here in Wisconsin. And that's especially true with our students of color. And that starts with changing the systems of inequity that hurt our systems, hurt our students, excuse me. The gaps existed, well before the pandemic. We especially, when you look at our higher poverty schools, and then the pandemic has certainly exacerbated those gaps. and those inequities. I think we should also acknowledge that, when we get back face to face for our schools, we have to do so safely. We can't force it. We can't have a one size fits all plan, for example. We have to make sure that it is local in the decisions because our circumstances and our conditions are very local. I do believe that our teachers need to have the vaccine. Some schools are able to physically distance better than others. Some facilities are more modern than others. Some have better HVAC systems than others. And all of this plays into whether or not we're able to have our schools go back to face safely. Our schools are open. I think some people may contest that. It's just the mode of instruction is different, whether it's virtual, face-to-face, or blended. It's certainly working for some kids. Some kids are thriving, with the virtual, the kids who, for example, used to get in trouble all the time, the students who had issues with discipline or suspension or expulsion, we're certainly not seeing that now. But yes, there are kids who are also struggling, and it's typically, that's how it was with, traditional school too. We had kids who struggled in that setting as well. So I think we do need to acknowledge that, and we have to acknowledge the role that this plays in gaps. So how do you address these gaps? I mean, I certainly, my platform addresses it through equity and a lens, expanding preschool for everybody, like I did in Pecatonica, better recruitment and retention of high quality teachers, a more fair and equitable school finance system that works for all public schools in Wisconsin.
And that is time. Thank you very much. Our next question, this will go to Dr. Jill Underly first. There have been proposals for increasing 4-year-old kindergarten from a half a day to a full day, and also for instituting 3-year-old kindergarten programs. What are your goals for state funding for early childhood education over the next 4 years?
I would certainly like to increase our funding for early childhood education. At Pecatonica, as the local superintendent here, I've been a leader in the state by offering high quality full day preschool and childcare. We had a need. We provided kids with the opportunity to go full day, 5 days a week. And parents took it and embraced it. And we provided after school wraparound programs also for not just early childhood and 4K, but also through 5th grade. And these are enrichment opportunities. And again, it's a need. We certainly need it. And when we look at opportunity gaps, we look at the school districts that have the best resources. They have access to programs like full day, 4K, they have access to birth to 3 programs for early interventions for speech and language and PT and OT. And these are proven strategies that lift all kids. If kids are going to be successful, they will have better reading and math scores. They will have opportunities for behavior interventions and speech and language. And this sets them up for a lifetime of success. So as state superintendent, I would be strongly advocating for these programs. I'll tell you really quick, at Pecatonica, we were able to implement it and it didn't cost us much more than the part-time program because we had an afternoon bus route that we eliminated, and the savings on our transportation translated to a teacher salary. And so we were able to have that additional staff member so that we could provide the program every day. And then we expanded it through the summer, and we have a camp program all summer long, full day camp we pay for that through Fund 80, which is our community services fund. And we're able to do that very low cost to the community. It's open to all kids in the community, and people like it. They actually look forward to it. The kids have fun. And again, it's based on providing opportunities for all kids. So as state superintendent, I would be strongly advocating to bring all these programs to the state.
Thank you. And I apologize. I did not give a time box for that question. It turned out not to matter in this case, but it will be 3 minutes to Dr. Deb Kerr now.
Okay, no worries, Jacob. I also am a strong child advocate of early childhood. And in fact, in Wilmot Grade School, I started the first 4K charter school there called Bright Beginnings because we needed to provide services for our parents. That's what they needed. It was only a half-day program. However, we made sure that we provided other kinds of services to help our parents who needed more of a full-time. I also believe that whether it's 3 or 4-year-old kindergarten, it should be a choice of the parents. We know that some parents prefer to have those children in their home if that's feasible for their family situation. When I got to Brown Deer, I also created another four-year-old kindergarten program because we were growing in diversity and growing in need. And we realized that if we started at the beginning before they got into our schools officially, then we would be able to better track their progress and get better outcomes. And that's exactly what's happened. My first 4K class is walking across the stage this year. So they're the class of 2021 and they started in 2008. So it's pretty exciting. And what the research has shown is that those kids are better adjusted, they attend school more regularly, they're more involved, and their parents are also more involved in the school setting. And so I also will advocate for additional funding, whether it's 3-year-old or 4-year-old. But I also want to make sure that we're doing it in a high quality way. So we have great early learning standards called the Wisconsin Early Learning Model Standards. And I would like to make sure that every school district is utilizing those standards and hiring certified teachers. We also implemented national standards in Brown Deer where there was a ratio of 2 adults to 20 kids, so 1 to 10. And that was very important too, to get them off to a very successful start. And that I think is important too. I think it's important that schools just don't open up another classroom without being thoughtful. So as a DPI superintendent, I would make sure that there's lots of resources to support our schools expanding their programs and making sure that they're doing it with fidelity, because that's going to be really, really important. And at Brown Deer, we also utilized our partnership with the YMCA to offer wraparound services right there in the school. So there was no need to do any kind of transition to another facility or parent pickup. And so those kids also got to eat with the other kids in the lunchroom and start to be assimilated into the school setting. The other thing that I love about 3- and 4-year-old kindergarten is it allows our kids to play and discover who they are through different learning modalities, whether it's outdoors or inside, and it helps us give them a jump start into their educational future. And so we all know that the money we invest in the beginning of a child's career gives us and reduces that school to prison pipeline. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to apologize in advance. This next question is a bit long, and it has to do with the American Rescue Plan, which is something that, of course, has been a moving target. It's been changing over the past few weeks. So I'm actually going to say it out loud, but then I'm going to put it into the chat just to help people follow along. Should the Biden administration's American Rescue Plan bill be passed, how would you administer the money given to the state of Wisconsin? Since each district in Wisconsin will be required to spend 20% of their money to mitigate learning loss, will there be criteria for determining the school districts with the most need? Would the districts with the highest poverty levels be given more funding consideration to compensate for their additional challenges? How important do you think it is to add a summer catch-up semester for students? And would that funding be used to cover those costs if you believe it's necessary? This is a 4-minute response, and it goes to Dr. Deborah Kerr first.
Well, thank you. This is certainly something we've all been watching very closely over the last couple of weeks, and so glad that we're going to get some extra support from the federal level, because whatever money we get at the federal level will free up state funding as well. And so what I would do is I would look at a weighted factor on how to distribute the money, because equity means giving people and school districts what they need. I don't think an equal distribution would be a fair way to handle this. So in my role as a past president of our AASA, I've already been working with the Biden administration on infrastructure. So I know one of the equities that have been really realized during this pandemic is the lack of robust internet access. And so I would look for other ways to fund those kinds of services so that our kids and teachers can get back to face-to-face instruction. I think mitigating loss is going to look different in every single district, especially if some of those districts have already been in session since early in September. And so I would also consider rural schools of getting a different funding factor because they have different needs. So that might be increased teacher salaries for rural schools so they can attract and retain their current teachers. It might require different kinds of programs to help our 12th graders, our seniors, get across the stage. I'm really worried about our 12th graders who have not been in school yet this year because they have some different challenges that some of our other students do. And so I would make sure that the schools have strategies and resources on how to get those 12th graders taken care of, making sure that they are achieving all of their credits and that they're ready to go on to whatever post-secondary opportunities that they choose. I would also work with our regional education agencies, the CESA directors, to talk about and learn more about what are their needs, and our area superintendents, what are your needs? What do you think you are going to need to spend your money on? Because again, it might look different in Brown Deer as it does in Pecatonica. And I want to make sure that everyone is getting what they need, because that's the funding formula changes that have to be considered moving forward. I know that in some cases, the DPI has just given equal amounts to people across the stage, but we've got to mitigate learning loss. We've got to make sure kids are on grade level. I want to pay our teachers well, especially if they're going to give up their summers to teach our kids. We need to look at things creatively. So maybe school needs to happen in the evening during the summer, maybe on the weekend. I just think that we have a chance to be as creative and innovative as we possibly can to offer the kind of programs that will meet the needs of our kids and also help our kids get across the stage and successfully graduate. I also know that our parents need support. You know, a lot of our parents, and especially in Brown Deer, have had to quit their jobs to handle this virtual learning. And I want to make sure that parents are also taken care of and that they know what their child needs to be successful as we transition out of the school year into the summer and then getting ready for next school year. The other area that I also see a need is the food insecurity. We fed our kids all since March 13th and all through the summer. I hope that continues because our kids are going to need the basic needs set aside for them so they can continue to learn. I think the summer school programming is going to give us some opportunities that we haven't had before. And we've got to just say we're going to catch up and accelerate kids, but we can't expect to do it all at once. Summertime is not going to be the only time that we spend on accelerating kids. I'm hoping that we can use it as a time to deal with their social and emotional needs and take care of the children first. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll now turn it over to Dr. Jill Underly, 4 minutes.
All right. I think Dr. Kerr said it very well, to be honest. It was, I agree with her very wholeheartedly in a lot of the aspects that she described. When I'm looking at the funding and how you administer the money given to the state of Wisconsin, I truly believe, though, that highest poverty schools first and filter it down through the Title I formula like it's currently done with the ESSER money. When I was at the agency on Title I, it was when we had the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act money, and that was also distributed through Title I. And that formula works because it does allocate to the highest poverty schools first. And we know through our own research and we know through identification processes that the highest leverage strategies are the ones that should be used. We know that the schools that have the most needs, the highest need schools, are the ones that need the most resources anyway. As far as the 20% to mitigate learning loss, sorry, I'm struggling with my words here. The highest need districts, again, will be the ones with the fewest opportunities and the lowest revenue limit. So often those are the highest poverty districts. And yes, I do feel that they should be required to spend that on mitigating. As far as the districts with their additional challenges, yes, absolutely. They have the most gaps and they have historically had them. As mentioned before, these gaps existed before the pandemic. These schools have been starved for cash so that they can provide these resources and opportunities to their kids. So absolutely, they should be given higher priority. As far as adding a voluntary summer catch-up semester for students, how important? I'm going to go semi-important on this. I've talked to parents. We've surveyed parents as we were planning for our summer programming this summer. And what they've had to say is that mental health is important for sure. They do not want virtual learning this summer for their kids for summer school. Visiting family is important. Perhaps grandparents who are now vaccinated, they want to see their family and they don't necessarily want summer school. They want their kids to have a normal, regular summer break. But they're open to other things such as, an earlier start date. We're open to other things throughout the school year, such as early childhood programming, after school programming, enrichment, and even remediation, teacher stipends for additional learning opportunities, funding technology and internet services for our families, supplemental resources, additional funding for staff, such as school nurses and mental health professionals, professional development for our teachers to become better instructional technologists, such as, designing virtual classes that work for all kids. CISAs certainly have a role in this too. So, helping with equity audits, delivering a statewide literacy framework, but we can't also forget our libraries. Our libraries have also suffered throughout the pandemic, and those are important community learning centers, especially for adult education. So we need to address how we can help those centers as well.
I thank you very much. We'll move on to the next question. This one is just a 1 minute. Can DPI, Department of Public Instruction, order school districts to reopen? Would you do so? And should teachers be vaccinated before schools reopen? Again, 1 minute. This one will start with Dr. Jill Underly.
Yes, they actually can order school districts to open. When we decided to close our school district buildings, there was some discussion whether DPI had the authority to do so. You recall it went through Department of Health Services. So and it was determined that DPI could make them close, but they didn't. They made it local and they went through DHS. So therefore, the counterpart would be that DPI could force them to open. I would not. I do believe it needs to be a local decision, and I do believe that teachers should be vaccinated before schools open.
Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Dr. Deb Kerr. 1 minute.
Thank you. On March 13th, I closed down Brown Deer School District. And as the district administrator, I had the authority to do that due to health reasons, and that's in state statute. So I agree with Jill. Yes, the DPI does have that authority, and so do other superintendents. I strongly believe that we need to get back to school right now. We all need to be back 5 days a week. I think we've had such learning loss. We've had significant trauma experienced by all of our kids. Our parents are fatigued. Some of them have had to quit their jobs. And I know that they want to get back to a routine. And so I believe that teachers should get vaccinated if they feel comfortable doing that, but the science is showing it's not necessary to get back to school. And the science of the data is also showing that school districts or schools are not spreaders of the disease. So I do want us to get back to school, and I would not mandate it, but I would strongly encourage all kids to get back to school.
Thank you very much. Now, the next question, these are topics we've talked about off and on, so we can just have a natural flow of things here. Most educators and parents, and as we've discussed tonight, all believe that virtual learning has been very difficult for students. And specifically as a result of more isolation because of the pandemic, there have been increased social and mental health problems experienced by students statewide. 2 minutes each. Just want to hear your ideas for dealing with that pervasive issue at all levels, K through 12. This one will start with Dr. Deborah Kerr.
So you're asking me about the virtual learning, correct?
More specifically, what your ideas are for addressing increased social and mental health problems that have come out of that.
Yes, absolutely. Just think about this. Last March, when we had all shut down our schools, parents became teachers, teachers became technology specialists, school districts became social workers and counselors trying to figure out how to feed the kids, how to make sure they had the materials, the supplies, the internet. Yeah, it's been traumatic for everyone involved. And I just want to do a shout out to all the parents and the teachers out there, because your work has been so important to help us get to this point right now. But yes, our children need that social development. And if anything from this pandemic, I think the whole society has realized how important teachers are. They do more than just teach reading and math. They teach our kids how to be good people and how to garner respect and care for others. And so the social emotional needs are critical, as well as the mental health needs, and trying to take care of all the kids. So we need to make sure that we have programs and resources from the state that allow all school districts to have access to the same kinds of materials. I know a lot of school districts are doing some great work, whether they're using Castle or Rethink Ed and other kind of programs, but we need to make sure all school districts have those resources so that they can safely reopen the schools, but also get back to taking care of the children. I think we're going to have to give our students voice. I know at the high school, I tried to make sure that our kids had a voice in how they learn. And, you know, it's more than just asking the kids, how are you doing today? I think it's making sure that kids and families and teachers have partnerships with mental health clinicians, that we have maybe places for them to go into schools, that they can self-manage some of their feelings, but we have to do a better job of identifying where our kids are social and emotional in order for them to learn. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Dr. Jill Underly. This is 2 minutes.
Yeah, so just to address the fact that, you know, I certainly want the school buildings open too. I know the kids miss their friends, they miss their teachers, the teachers miss them too. And it is a burden that, you know, this pandemic has put on all of us. And I think we need to acknowledge that our kids are surviving a pandemic. And so whatever resources we can get them to help them through this, I think is important. But mental health access and lack of it, as well as social emotional health for students, suicide rates in particular too, depression and anxiety, this all existed pre-pandemic as well. And I feel that we need to acknowledge that too, that the pandemic has made it worse for sure, but this problem is not going to go away. So far too many students in Wisconsin have lacked access to mental health and emotional wellness support that they've needed. The problem, like I shared, has only, and we know this, I'm not telling you, you know, things you don't already know, that it's been exacerbated by this pandemic. So greatly expanding these services to our schools provides an area or core component, I should say, of my platform. So we need to provide allocated school mental health funding directly to our schools so that they can hire trained personnel or train their existing personnel in trauma-informed care practices. We need more mental health and counseling professionals in our school, period. We could certainly try after-school programming. We could try pushing in vendors who could see kids, you know, maybe during a study hall, or could see the before school, maybe, you know, part of their lunch, so that we don't have to have kids leaving school through travel. And it also is a good way to access areas of the state that don't have regular mental health access too. So getting these individuals into our school so they can work in tandem with our school professionals and pupil services is important. But every area of Wisconsin needs to offer trauma-informed care to its teachers, as well as after-school programming.
And that is time. Thank you very, very much. So the next question, this one we will begin with Dr. Jill Underly, and it is a 3-minute response period. And it is, do you support Governor Tony Evers' K-12 budget proposal? What items in his budget do you feel are most essential for moving K-12 education forward? And will you lobby legislators on behalf of this budget?
I just have these compound questions. I have to make sure that I answer all pieces of it. But yes, I do support Governor Evers' budget and the increases to public education for sure. I have a great relationship with Governor Evers. I worked at the Department of Public Instruction under his first term. I also have a great relationship with those in the legislature, and I can't wait to get to work to advocate for Wisconsin's public school kids. As Governor Evers has said repeatedly, what's best for, or what's great for kids is great for Wisconsin. So we need to keep our education funding in our public schools and prevent expansion of the privatization. We need to fix our funding formula so that all schools are great, like the well-funded schools, so that all schools are well-funded, rural and urban. And I support the recommendations that he has placed in his budget, such as the increase for special education reimbursement. I'd actually push him to go further, to 90% reimbursement for special education. My school district, passed a resolution on that a couple years ago. And you look at high poverty aid, you look at reimbursement for English language learners. We need to increase the funding that gets to the neediest kids. for sure. And those recommendations, again, are in the Blue Ribbon Commission report, which I also support. So we need to support, particularly also after a decade of austerity cuts. I mean, we lost $1 billion in our public schools the past 10 years, and we need to increase our, like I said, these special education reimbursements, EL, high poverty. These are funding sources that benefit all kids, and I'm excited to get to work on them. Every child, every day should have access to a great public education. That's the heart of my platform. And no matter the zip code that they're from, and I would fully support the state's commitment to 2/3 funding for our schools. I would also, the Office of Educational Opportunity, I support closing that as well, you know, and with these independent charter schools that take money out of our public schools as well. And I would support also halting the expansion of voucher school programs, because I believe that money should also stay in our public schools.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Dr. Deborah Kerr. This is again a 3-minute response.
Thank you. Yes, Governor Evers has put forth a great budget for K-12 education, and I'm really excited about that. I've also had the chance to work with Governor Evers and as the state superintendent in my role as the president of our Wisconsin Association of School Administrators. So we've got a great relationship as well. I think we can definitely agree on a lot of things. And I really appreciated his extra support for career and technical education, because I truly believe in strength-based pathways for all of our kids. It's not college or career, it's college and career. And so he's put in some funding to help support apprenticeship programs all across the state, and I would love to see that expand. I also like the fact that providing funding to help some of our kids in need get driver's license. And I think that's going to be important, because that's a barrier. Transportation becomes a barrier for those kids trying to get to a job. I also have promoted a 90% reimbursement for special education, because that money frees up regular education money to be spent in other ways. And so my Brown Deer School Board wrote a resolution to the legislature asking for 90% reimbursement. And I think we can accomplish that over the next couple bienniums. I know that money is tight right now, and we're going to have to think about how do we do a gradual plan. I like the amount that's in the budget right now, but I would like us to move towards 90%. The funding formula idea is also 80 years this funding formula has been in place, and I'm not sure it's really serving the needs of all of us. And where Dr. Underly and I disagree is how we support school choice, private schools, and vouchers. So just so everybody understands, the state superintendent is responsible for all of the children in all of the school systems and all the school sectors. And so it's the law. And right now in a Republican government, I don't see any moratorium happening anytime soon. I also don't, I want to be realistic. So I want everyone to listen with an open heart and open mind. I don't think there's going to be any rollback to collective bargaining at this time. But more importantly, what that means is we just need to have great relationships with our teachers and our teachers union, so that we can create the working conditions that are necessary, just like I did in Brown Deer, to move the district forward. I agree with the recommendations from the Blue Ribbon Commission. I think those are laudable. However, there's not been any action taken from that committee for the last 2 years. So I think as the next state superintendent, we have to figure out what kind of funding could we get to leverage more funding for English language learners, those high poverty kids, and our kids with special needs. And then finally, it's important that we approach education as unification. We need to unify around the needs of all of our kids in our great state, and that's exactly what I will do as the next state superintendent.
I thank you very much. And we are getting to the home stretch here. The next 3 questions are all related. The first one is just a simple yes, no, but the next 2, like I said, are related to it, so you'll be able to expand on your position. This one goes to Dr. Deborah Kerr first. And again, it is a simple yes, no. Do you support maintaining taxpayer funding for school vouchers?
Yes.
Dr. Jill Underly?
No.
As promised, here comes the next question, which is related. What changes would you propose in current guidelines dealing with voucher and independent charter schools And Jill Underley, that's yours first. It is a 2-minute response.
Okay. I think I'm always paranoid I'm on mute. That I think it's, that being said, I'm a strong advocate for our public schools. I'm 100% pro public schools, and I believe that our public dollars belong in our public schools. I want to invest that money in our public schools so that all public schools are great, that parents don't need to take their kids out of a public school and go to a voucher school, for example. The voucher schools, there's a lot of programs in choice, and right now choice costs taxpayers $860 million a year. $380 million of that is just for private school vouchers. And I think about if that money were instead in our public schools, we wouldn't be going to school referendum as frequently as we are. We could be investing in our buildings. We could be investing in technology and internet. We could be paying our teachers more. There's a whole host of issues that I feel that because we are underfunding our public schools because of private school choice, that we are shortchanging our public schools and our promise to the future of Wisconsin. So, I see firsthand how hard hit our public schools are. I provided all those different examples. So we need to invest in them with smaller class size and technology. Our public schools are struggling. Our teachers are doing the best that they can. Our parents are certainly doing the best that they can. Our communities support our referendums. It doesn't matter what their political stripes are. They're still passing them because they believe in their local public school. And so in the short term, I certainly care about the kids that are in vouchers. I would look to phase them out, though. I don't want to expand the program. I don't want to put any more money into the program. I would like to simply stop the program and phase it out eventually. So a lot of the voucher schools have huge problems, and we need to acknowledge that too. I think that they need to be held to the same accountability as public schools when it comes to licensing, when it comes to opt-out rates with the forward exam, and even in transparency on our tax bills as well. So I'm going to make sure that I fight for every kid, not just the kids in the unaccountable voucher system.
Okay, thank you very much. I will now turn it over to Dr. Deborah Kerr.
Thank you, Jacob. First of all, a little history. This is a 40-year-old debate and conflict that we've had. So I'm a bridge builder and I'm an arranger, and I'm hoping that I can reach consensus with everyone that we need to move forward. My job as the state superintendent will be to advocate for all kids in Wisconsin. And if we're going to create a world-class education system that's the highest performing in the country, we need to make sure that all children have a high quality education. High tides do raise all boats. So what I propose doing, though, is bringing all the stakeholders to the table to develop one system of full transparency, accountability, and equitable access. Nobody has ever done that. And so I realize that we have to uphold the law fairly and as written, because parents will always have the choice of where they're going to attend their schools. But I agree with Jill. There are some schools that are not doing very well, whether it's public or private or voucher or charter school. And so we have to help those schools build capacity, but there's been no one that has ever helped school districts develop a metrics of accountability that could be related to a school report card. And so the other piece for me, it's personal. All right, my niece is a charter school principal in Chicago Public Schools, Roberto Clemente. My former high school principal, Jim Pide, is now the president as Mesmer. And so I value their partnerships and I want them to work with us, not against us. And I think we could find some efficiencies if we begin to partner with all of the sectors in our state. I don't think anyone has even thought about it. So I want us to stop arguing about the fighting, about the funding. I'm willing to look at different ways to fund all of our schools. And that's what should be the question. How could we fund all of the children to have a great education in Wisconsin? And I think we need to take a look at that, because every person I have met on the campaign trail, they want Wisconsin education to succeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, and I want to make sure I'm mindful of and respectful of time. We do have one more question and then closing statement. Are we okay there? Okay. So this is the last question before closing statements. It will go to Dr. Deb Kerr first. And we've been talking a little bit here about school choice. I mean, arguably the largest school choice program in Wisconsin is open enrollment.
Mhm.
There aren't a lot of restrictions. Students, I'm a parent of 2 in Madison,
Okay.
and Madison parents can do Monona Grove, McFarland, Waunakee, Verona, Middleton Cross Plains. As long as there's space available, there's not really any restriction to that. This is an option that is taken up across Wisconsin by more than 60,000 students.
Mhm.
Do you think, first off, that exacerbates low income and racial segregation? Should DPI analyze that? And what other suggestions might you have to modify the program?
Mhm.
This is a 3-minute response period, and it goes to you first, Dr. Kerr.
Okay, this is a great question. This is one that we really haven't been asked in too much detail, so thank you for asking it. You're right. Open enrollment is one of the probably the largest school choice program we've had in a long time, giving parents options of where to educate their kids. And I just know at Brown Deer, when you are a school of choice or a destination school district, you are getting thousands of applications, and there's lots of work that has to be done to manage the open enrollment process effectively and efficiently. And so whatever changes are going to be made, I think you have to work with our area superintendents and the people who are actually overseeing the open enrollment programs. And so I know there's been some discussion about how to expand that, especially if parents want virtual learning choices instead of just their 3 choices of brick and mortar school districts. And so I'm not sure it's been exacerbated by poverty because because where I'm from in Milwaukee, we just know that parents want the best education for their child, and parents are willing to do anything. And even that means driving their kids 20 or 30 minutes. But what we also found out in Brown Deer is that a lot of parents open enroll where they work. So I have a lot of parents who live in Brown Deer that they work in MPS, Milwaukee Public Schools. So they open enrolled because it was just more convenient for them to be in those kind of programs. Or maybe they wanted a different program that we didn't have, a Montessori program, for example. So I do think if we do anything with open enrollment, we need to look at the data. How many kids are we servicing? Are those kids doing well? Each district has a set number of seats that they're allowed to take every year. And I know that is controversial sometimes because maybe the districts aren't doing that consistently over time. But I know that Brown Deer became a most diverse and integrated school district through the Chapter 220 program. And we were one of the first school districts to be racially integrated at a 35% benchmark. And so there's ideas on ways to help look at equity and diversify our schools. But I think if parents need to have different options for open enrollment, that needs to be surveyed. We need to find out what the needs are and what the challenges are working with the people from the DPI that are currently overseeing those programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll turn it over now to Dr. Jill Underly.
All right. Not much more I could really add to that, but yes, I think, what I'll say is that I'm not necessarily opposed to open enrollment because, as Deb said, there are certainly reasons families may do that. Right now, the system does provide for winners and losers in open enrollment when it comes to districts. There's school districts that, gain, aid, because they get it from the school district that the kids that they're gaining are coming from. And then the school districts that lose the kids lose that aid through tuition transfers at the end of the school year. And that's harmful as well. It's because I think it certainly needs to be looked at. Like I said, I'm not opposed to it. And I understand why some parents choose open enrollment. For example, we've always surveyed every parent that chooses to open enroll their child out to another school district, and it always is in the best interest of the child. They have a daycare center or they have a job that's in another school district and they want their younger kids with them. Is most often the primary reason. Another reason is that a parent may move into our school district and their child has a couple more years left in high school in their other district. And that's just in Pecatonica. I know in other school districts, parents may be moving their kids out because of academic achievement. And Deb referenced the Chapter 220 program. That was an open enrollment program that worked. When we look at school desegregation and we look at academic achievement for Black students in Milwaukee, that was a program that worked, and yet that program was phased out. So I think it does need further study. Like I said, I'm not opposed to it necessarily. I do feel whatever's in the best interest of their children. But in these cases, this is public school to public school, and I support that. I support keeping our dollars in our public school. And so open enrollment is certainly one way we can do that.
I thank you very much. We are now at the point for closing statements. So this is free forum, 1 minute for each candidate, starting with Dr. Jill Underly. I'll turn it over now.
Okay, so, I was thinking about how to do this, and I think what we should maybe address is the fact that there's certain things that set us apart. And Deb and I agree on a lot of things, but first and foremost, I'm the candidate who's currently leading the school district through a pandemic. A lot has changed over the course of this crisis. I do have also 20 years plus of experience in every facet of public education, from elementary all the way through middle school, high school, UW system, DPI, and now currently as a superintendent. I am a parent of kids in our public school. I have 2 children in middle school, one who's on the autism spectrum. And I feel that this experience, the depth and the breadth, has certainly given me a global perspective of our public education system, not just as an employee or as a leader, but also as a parent. I know how to balance a budget. I know how to do more with less. I have a very strong record of financial management in my school district. I'm unapologetically 100% pro-public school. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Dr. Deb Kerr.
Thank you, everyone. And, at this time in history, I think I'm the most experienced and uniquely prepared to lead our great state out of this pandemic. Jill is right. We're both very qualified. We're very educated, but I have more experience. I've turned around public schools in the last 34 years of my career. And now it's time to focus on the instruction piece of the job. So my vision is to create this world-class education system so that Wisconsin can become the highest performing system again in the whole entire state, or entire nation. And so I believe our DPI must be a beacon of hope, be a customer service agent. I also believe that our priority today is to get our children back in school. I trust our parents to make the best choices ever for their kids. Our Black and brown kids have not been back full time since the beginning of September, whether white classmates across the state are in face-to-face instruction. Our kids are not winning, and our most vulnerable and marginalized kids are suffering. 7 words that can change a kid's life today. I love having you back in school.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank both Dr. Deb Kerr and Dr. Jill Underly for joining us tonight. I hope that you've found this as informative as we have. And I thank you. At this time, I will turn it over to Arlene Silveira for the second half of our forum with the Madison City School Board.
Thanks, Jacob. Maya and Savion, can you join us? Hi, Maya. Hi, Savion. Well, I too would like to thank Dr. Underly and Dr. Kerr for their time, and wish you well in the next month of campaigning. I know it's you have a lot of forums, what I understand. So thank you. And for the next half an hour, we're going to talk with 2 people running for the Madison School Board, both unopposed. Yay, yay. Savion is running for re-election, and Maya Pearson is running for the seat being vacated by Gloria Reyes, who is retiring from the school board. So we are going to do this a little bit differently. After your opening statement, we will have 3 questions, and we have 8 minutes per question. We'd like to have it a little conversational, if that's the way you 2 would like to do it. It does not have to be 4 minutes for one and 4 minutes for the other, but just some dialogue on your thoughts about what's going on in the district. So with that, we're going to start with our opening statement, which is 1 minute each, and we will start with Maya.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Maya Pearson. I first want to thank Grumps and Eastside Progressives for holding this. I know that we've rescheduled a couple times to be part of this, so I'm happy that we were able to get a time locked in. So I am running for seat 1. Last year, I ran for seat 6, and pretty much the same things that I was fighting for and voicing as issues that I wanted to address are the same that I want to this time. I definitely want to make sure that we are having student success, teacher success, and definitely growing our community collaborations and seeking more investment from them. One thing that I am really excited for to be on the board for is that one of the things that I was definitely focused on was all day 4K, and that is now like materialized. So we're having that pilot program, and I'm really super excited for that and to be a part of that moving forward. So yes, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Maya. And Savion?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I just want to start off by saying I'm really excited about what this board will look like going into the future. I think the representation in terms of having a district level leadership that's reflective of the student demographic will be really important for this district going forward, not only for our kids to look up to and our students, but for our perspectives as former MMSD grads will be really important. Last year was certainly a challenge for all of us, but I was excited that and very thankful and grateful for the community support, broad community support that got our historic referendum passed that includes the all-day 4K pilots. We'll be starting off at 8 schools, 16 different sections. Half the schools that have the largest Black student population and highest poverty will have an all-day 4K section. That'll be greatly exciting. We've been hosting listening sessions on how we transform our 4 comprehensive high schools and getting started on building that new elementary school on the south side to finally bring an elementary school to a part of the city that's long been neglected. So we have a lot of important work, including the phase reopening, following the science, getting everybody vaccinated. But we're gonna have another busy year ahead of us.
I think you will. Thanks, Savion. Now we'll get into the questions. As I said, basically 4 minutes each, but if you want to go back and forth, have dialogue, we can keep it as, informal and as conversational as you two would like. And the first question, we'll start with Savion, and I'll ask the main question, and then I will maybe more than likely have some follow-up questions as well. So once students are back in schools for in-person learning, what do you expect to be the most significant 2 issues that staff in the district will have to deal with?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we've been living through the COVID-19 pandemic and the other pandemic of racial injustice in our country. And so last summer certainly shone another bright light on those issues, especially in our schools. And inevitably, the conversation turns down to how do we improve our future? And that comes down to how do we better educate our children? And so as we re-enter our children and teachers back into schools following the science, we will have to have a keen eye on the deep social and emotional impact that this prolonged isolation and virtual learning has caused, especially for our youngest learners. But another issue will be a lot of our learners, particularly at the higher level, our Black and brown families, had a better experience with school. They had more autonomy over their education. For the first time in American education history, we had 0 suspensions or expulsions. How do we keep that going? Why can't we keep that going in brick and mortar? So how do we, and a lot of families reported that they had more contact with their teachers. A lot of students felt like they had more control over their education. So how do we keep that going? But just keeping a keen eye, like a really observant eye in our pedagogy and in our family engagement on the social and emotional impacts for our youngest learners. There will be no perfect answer to that, but we're really going to have to improve our communication structures. Maya, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Maya, your thoughts?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that Savion hit it on the head. I think, definitely we can't shortchange, our students at all on their social emotional processing of like basically what just happened. A lot of our students are not only dealing with just loss, from their families. We have students who are experiencing extreme circumstances with like homelessness and, food access, like a host of things. So I think that, we definitely have to rethink and make sure that we are very intentional about reopening and really addressing the emotional piece and the processing for our students, but also for our teachers too, because I do think, they've experienced just as much as our kids have as well. I think Savion also made a good point. With my 3 children, my son is soaring. Like he's doing like the best that he has done, I think, in education online. But I think that's partially because he is able to be, kind of create his environment the way he wants to, and me supporting that as much as possible. And, my daughters definitely have done the best that they have, previously done as well. So I think, understanding that some children are definitely doing well right now, and academic wise, and then some children are not, but understand that that's not like, there's not one thing that fits all. Like when we go back, there's no way that we can just say that this is the only thing that's going to work. We definitely have to take a multifaceted approach and really understanding that, the emotional state of our children, emotional state of our teachers and staff are going to be the most important part, and it may take some time.
You both talked about social emotional impacts on staff and students. I think it was mentioned evaluating, is there learning loss? Do you think that the school district has adequate resources to be able to handle these additional burdens in a school?
I think definitely. So I guess like starting out first thinking about like, how do we determine the learning loss? Like we can't use those same mechanisms, the traditional mechanisms to assess that. It's just not going to work. So I think that definitely trying to figure out the ways that we can do that, but also still being very mindful that, I can't take a test if I'm like emotionally traumatized by what just happened with the pandemic, right? Like, even then it's going to be difficult. So I think that those two things are going to be the factor of like definitely figuring out other mechanisms and ways to assess learning loss, and also making sure that we are intentional again about the emotional level. I do think that the school district has the adequate resources. And I think thinking of it in a way of resources isn't only just money and dollars. It is also community access and having, and that's something that I always speak about is, how do we wrap around our children, not just, having money and, hiring more teachers and such, but how do we make sure that we get more investment from our community? How do we include, grandparents in the school or something like that? I remember my grandma always being at my school, like, you always had that person. So again, like finding different ways to be able to address these issues is going to be super important. So I think we have adequate resources.
Yeah, I think, in terms of determining the learning loss, unfortunately, the federal government came out and said that we will have to do some form of assessments to assess that. Madison School District, and I presume a lot of other districts across the state, will have a robust summer semester. We're no longer calling it summer school, but summer semester, to also take stock of where our students and teachers are at. We can probably use a multitude of ways to assess that, whether it's summative assessments or standardized assessments to assess where kids are at in terms of content mastery going back. And I think we'll have to pay particular attention to kids in the transitioning grades. So kindergarten, 5th, and 9th in terms of determining where those kids are at. But I think the key will be, again, that social emotional aspect, because we probably won't get good academic outcomes if our kids aren't intact internally, right? So that'll be the key. And in terms of resources, there is no public school district in the country that isn't strapped trying to stretch every dollar right now. Right now with our drop in enrollment, we actually have opportunities to increase our ratios in terms of psychologists, counselors, teachers, our staff to student ratios. So we will be creative with that. And as Maya said, we have to have the community in the classroom. We've got to do better at partnerships. We've got to do better at forming trusting relationships with folks out in the community.
And one just real quick follow-up. Both of you mentioned that there are a number of students that are doing really well virtual learning. And I hear and I read daily that there are districts all across the country that are now going to implement actually district-wide virtual schools to support these kids that don't want to go back because they feel like they're having a better school experience online. Is that something that you would support? And for Savion, is that something the district is discussing?
I think internally those conversations are going on right now with the phased reopening. Students will have a virtual option, but right now, yeah, the district is providing that. I think especially when we consider our high school students who are living in, circumstances where they are income earner for their home and, they want to work a half-time job to help pay the bills, or they want to do an apprenticeship. When we think about pathways, I think virtual learning, especially at the secondary level, will give kids a lot of unique opportunities moving forward.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next question, and we'll start with Maya on this one. I'm going to lay out a scenario and set the scene, and then we'll get the questions in. So school board members are elected representatives of the MMSD community. The superintendent is hired by and accountable to the Board of Education. This dynamic often causes confusion between the policy role of the board and the administrative leadership role of the superintendent. While it is important for the board and the individual board members to avoid micromanaging the superintendent, it is likewise important for the board to have a thorough public discussion about the policies and actions proposed by the superintendent. For the board, accountability requires actually voting on proposals brought to it by the superintendent. So do you agree that there is a benefit for the board to be more accountable to the community by voting on policies and proposals? And if yes, what steps will you take to make sure this step of accountability happens? And if not, what are your reasons for supporting the current practice of deferring to the superintendent and not voting on controversial questions? Maya?
Yeah, so my understanding, and I'm assuming that, I'm not on the board yet, so I'm not exactly sure, right? Of the conversations and such outside of what we all kind of know and what we all see during the meetings and board meetings. But I'm assuming that the question just refers about how do we gather the input on policies and the accessibility with, board meetings and, the board itself and the community and connection. So I guess I'll answer it in that way, because that's just my understanding. I think that definitely we can find ways. I think the board has done well at trying to figure out ways that the community during COVID times, I call it, that people can engage with them. So definitely figuring out how we can, increase access through maybe signing up for Zooms longer periods. So I know I'm on some other boards that we have put in place where public input can happen throughout the meeting instead of just only at the beginning. So maybe creating some access there. Coming down to the Doyle building where right now it's not open. So, but if it was open, making sure that we are having different ways. So, if that's having a meeting at Doyle or having meetings in other parts of the town where we can get more people to come that way, because not everyone can make it down to, you know, the Doyle Bidding at like 5 p.m. to like be able to be there, right? But then do we be creative and think of new ways to include folks? I think that, you know, this has created a way where people can be creative about how do we get people to be involved more. And so I think that for me, it's definitely, you know, around that is access and how can we increase that in creative ways that we haven't seen before, because now we had to create some new ways, right? So that would probably be my answer.
Are you supportive of more public discussion by the board on issues in voting in public?
I think that, you know, some issues definitely, like, there needs to be a robust ways in which, you know, people can give input. So I do support, like, you know, as much community input as possible on some things, but I do think that sometimes, you know, we have to make sure that the board can do the work that they need to do. So I don't know, like, we would definitely have to try to figure out ways to balance that, right? And yeah, so I would say yes, I do. But again, making sure that we're being mindful that we have to balance both sides. So
thanks.
Mhm.
Xavier?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Well, I do want to say that we were debating a hotly contested policy last night that the board will be voting on. So we do debate contested and sometimes controversial policies. The SRO contract also comes to mind, but I think it's about correctly evaluating, you know, what our current board policies say. So for example, with some policies, we don't want to set a district-wide policy too broad where each school needs flexibility. So for example, like, I'm all for democratizing decision-making within the district, but we need to assess whether this is a school level policy, elementary or middle or secondary level policy, or a district-wide policy. In general, I do support more opportunities for public participation in forums. I think we should bring back citizen committees. I think we should find ways to involve more parents and community members in school-based leadership teams or principal advisory committees to help develop school level policies or even classroom level policies. On the whole, I do think that we have to revamp the board policy committee. The policy committee, I think, is kind of underutilized at this point. I serve on that with Christina Gomez-Schmidt. That's going to be on the agenda next month, next April, in terms of how do we better utilize that policy committee as a tool to make change in the district. I think right now it's, you know, we're trying to modernize a lot of our policies. So we're ensuring they're compliant at bare minimum with state and federal law. I do believe a lot of them are, but a lot of them do need revision. And we need to have a process where we can consult with legal advice to make sure that what we're writing new is compliant with the law as well. So, you know, we need to, and I anticipate this will be on the agenda next month, but really evaluate our policy creation process and starting with that policy committee. But sometimes, you know, the best policy is flexibility at times, especially during COVID, for example, where the metrics can change. The new science and guidance coming out from the federal level is changing as well. And we need to be agile, I guess I would say.
Do you feel that there's a good balance between, I guess, the board's role in the superintendent's role? Do you feel as a board member, or Maya, when you view the board, that the board is involved in public discussions and decision making, or that it is mostly handled primarily by the administration?
I think that's a good question, because one of the first things Dr. Jenkins wanted when he came in here was board development. So how does the board work collaboratively with the superintendent? I think that's a lot where the real work comes in, is that collaboration work. For example, I think all of us would be familiar with the issue that a lot of La Follette and East Side parents raise regarding fundraising. We definitely have to review some policy, but a lot of that is collaboration with other board members and community listening too. And so, I mean, that's an area for improvement on how we have more robust discussions in public, whether we need more meetings or we need to better craft our agendas. Is the work group cadence the best cadence to have public input on? Are we adequately informing the public in areas where folks in the community are at, that these conversations are happening? What conversations, again, need to happen at the school level? And is the central office supporting schools facilitating those conversations? So yeah, I do think there's a balance. The board is currently going through like extensive professional development on collaboration with the administration. But I do think you raise a good point.
Okay, thanks. We'll go to our final question now, and Savion will start. So, given that the board has voted to remove armed police officers from our high schools, please give your thoughts on the following scenario. 2 high school students tell a school staff member that another student was threatening people on the bus and even showed them that he had a gun in his backpack. What steps does the board expect the staff member to take? And how will this now all play out in the school under the current guidelines, I guess?
Absolutely. So there are state and federal mandated laws that require the involvement of a police officer. For example, when a firearm or contraband is found on campus. But unfortunately, this has happened before in our high schools and middle schools. These occasions have been rare. But what's happened was that the student likely felt that they needed that weapon for protection for whatever reason, and a staff member or a police officer was able to safely disarm the student. Really unfortunate situations. We need to ask why students feel like they need a firearm to protect themselves. But we do have guidelines for staff to safely engage the student, disarm the student, and involve the police when necessary.
Will there be any staff in the building that is armed?
No.
And so who would be the staff that would engage the student? Would that be principals or social workers, or what are the guidelines?
I think formally what's written down is the school safety assistants, but I think there is some flexibility in terms of who in the building has the best relationship with that student. In those incidences before, it's ranged from a trusted teacher to an AP to a social worker to a school security assistant. And it's kind of highly contextual based off who the student is and what's the situation going on.
Maya, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's important, it's super important to make the clear distinction that, with this question or this scenario, that the fact that officers are not in our school does not impact of how we address the situation or how it's handled. I think that with the situation in itself that you mentioned, I think that there are factors that are unknown, like Savion mentioned, who has the best relationship with the student, when we're having teachers or the staff that are addressing it at the same time. I think there's also as Savion also mentioned, why is that child even having a gun in the first place, or why do they feel unsafe? Is the child being bullied? Has there been prior incidents? Is there a mental health crisis that's going on for that child? So I think that, it's super important to have those thoughts, but also to understand the scenarios complex in itself. And it's not as simple as, well, which staff is going to be the person who is going to address this, because even as Savion mentioned, you could have like a security guard or something like that, if we had those, to be able to address that. And, that they might not be the best person to talk with that student. You might have to actually get the counselor or something like that. I do think that then that brings up the question of like, who is in our school? So it's like, we know for a fact that our auxiliary staff have been cut. So we have less staff that are, our counselors. We have less staff that are mental health professionals. And so when we're talking about this situation, I think that that's super important to think through. And, are we going to increase auxiliary staff completely, to help support that? So for me, it's definitely, how do we encourage and equip our teachers and staff and our students with, skills to protect themselves and make themselves feel safe. But also at the same time, making sure that we have the staff like peer counselors, maybe ways of teaching students and teachers and staff like de-escalation skills, because I think that there's ways to do it. We don't always have to have an officer in the schools to be able to be that person. So definitely we should see our children in an empathy way and not in a sympathy way, and understanding that it's not as simple as who is going to be that person. Is there a designated person and such? So
Yeah,
I just wanted to
bring up a good point about trainings on de-escalation skills and the like. Is Savion, has that training happened? I know it's been such a weird year, but if, prior to kids coming back into the high schools potentially this year, has any of that training happened?
Yeah, so a degree of training did happen even before the SRO vote. A lot of these protocols were in place, just in case, like East High School, for example, is a block big, just in case the SRO was on the other side of the building. A lot of this training has been in place, and at our budget discussion last night, a lot of this professional development was an early action item. So should we approve those early items this month, that training would begin as soon as possible, as soon as, the summer school starts.
Anything else either of you would like to add? We're just about at time.
Yeah, I think, as we move this work forward, we're really trying to get into root cause issues and changing a lot of the cultures in the school. So folks don't have to feel like they have to have a weapon to be safe in school. And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Well,
I was gonna say root cause too.
what was that,
Great
Maya?
minds. I just say great minds. I was just gonna say the root causes. I think everything starts there.
Well, on behalf of Grumps and ESP, we'd like to thank you so much for your time. I wish we had more time. I kind of like the dialogue of going back and forth. And there are so many issues, as Savion mentioned in his introduction. So we wish you the best of luck with the rest of the school year, and then meeting all of the challenges going into the new normal next year. So thank you very much for your service. And I will turn back to Jacob.
Yep, and I will just say thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for being engaged tonight. As I mentioned at the beginning, you can learn more about the Eastside Progressives at eastsideprogressives.org, or Grumps, Grandparents United for Madison Public Schools, at madcitygrumps.org. This forum will be available on Eastside Progressives YouTube channel. Usually it's broadcasting now, but usually you end it and then they have some processing they do. It should be there by tomorrow morning. So if anybody, friends, neighbors missed it, want to catch it, you'll be able to catch it there.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone who participated.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.